Hi there, my friend. I want to thank RG175 for sponsoring this episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. Great schools thrive under great leadership. At RG175, we understand that finding the right match between a school and its next leader is a defining moment for both heads and trustees. With extensive experience in independent school leadership and a highly personalized approach, we guide boards through thoughtful search processes and support school leaders through key career transitions. Whether you're looking for your next leadership opportunity or seeking the ideal fit for your school, RG175 is here to help. Visit rg175.com. Again, that's rg175.com to learn more, because behind every successful school is a great leader. Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. I'm really excited to be joined by John Farber from RG175. John and RG have been so gracious to sponsor the podcast, and I'm excited to dig into kind of the head of school journey, the work that you need to do in order to become an effective head of school, and the kinds of things that you should be thinking about when you are a head of school. John's got lots of experience, head, consultant, all the things. John Farber, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and thank you. And thank you for supporting the pod. I'm curious, before we get going, I did a little bit of an intro, but if you can introduce yourself and tell folks about RG175, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, myself, I was the head of two schools, South Kent School in Connecticut and Old Trail School south of Cleveland, Ohio. Combined 21 years. Prior to that, I was director of enrollment at Beaumont Hill School in the Boston area. And prior to that, I was at the Darrow School, Landmark School, and Winston School in Dallas, where I started. It's been a lot really interesting for me. The past year, I've done a search for Landmark, and I've done a search for Winston, where I started teaching. So it was thrilling to be able to do that and help those two schools. Was on the board of Isaac's, board chair for 3 years. Co-founded the International Coalition of Boys Schools with one of my old dear friends, Ed Kowalczyk from the Hill School. I like creating things and helping independent schools. It's my passion. It's more than a job. People always ask me, well, what's your job now? You're no longer a head, so you're retired. Well, not really. I manage a firm of 21 consultants, 19 of whom were our former heads of school. And so you're managing people that aren't used to being managed, but I have a great group. It's an all-star team. And we have a lot of fun together, and we work really hard, and 100% of us are totally committed to going well beyond a typical search process to help our schools. That's what it's all about.
100%. I think we share that passion for independent schools and making that option available to more kids. Hey, I'm curious. So, you and I have known each other a long time. I've actually interviewed you before back when I was at EMA. We did a podcast, which was fun.
Yeah.
A lot has changed since that last pod that we did. Back then, we were talking about why an enrollment director would make for a great head of school, and there are lots of compelling reasons for that. But since then, how have expectations shifted at the board level, and especially in terms of business acumen, revenue generation? I mean, what are boards thinking about in terms of their candidates? I'm super curious.
Well, it really depends on the school. One of the things I love about head search is that I've done almost 40 head searches. I've done another 25 senior administrative searches. What I love is everyone is incredibly different. Search committees are fascinating. They're made up of people that have incredible passion for their school. They don't want to make a mistake. It takes a while to start trusting the consultant. And I totally get that, because we walk in as total strangers and we're giving them suggestions on what to do to help their school. So it takes a while to build that trust. Once we have it, it's a great relationship. But I think, it really matters. Another fascinating thing is, Peter, these independent schools are radically different. Even if they're in the same town and they're roughly the same size, same grade levels, does not mean they're anything like each other. And that's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to know a lot of schools, some of whom I never even heard of before. and, wonderful people. One common denominator I find in search committees is the board members are passionate to do what's best for the school. They don't always know how to do that, but they know they want to do that. So when they figure that out, that they can trust us, good things happen, really good things happen. One of the things we do different that I think is really different, really important, is we really do a deep dive analysis into the school when we visit. And I can cite lots of examples, but a most recent one, I looked at the board. They thought they were looking for someone who's totally entrepreneurial and would be out front and, focused on fundraising and building relationships within their community. And I said, we have a lot of work to do operationally within the school. There's been a lot of things missed, a lot of things forgotten, procedures and policies. We need to pay a lot of attention to those. So you're going to need someone either who can do both, or let a head come in, identify a day-to-day leader of the school, and let the head go out and do everything else. So they thank me profusely. They would not have known that. They're hands off. They're a wonderful board, but they didn't realize that the operations had gotten a little fallen far behind. So, and that's been it, because we're bold. I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm not going to go in and tell them what they want to hear all the time. And my partners are the same way. That's why I think we're different. If you read our position statements, we state it like it is. We don't put, frosting on the cake. We want to be able to be really clear and open and honest with head candidates so they know what they're getting into. We don't want any surprises. And I think board members are today what's different. I think a lot of them are afraid to make a mistake. I get it, because the stakes are high, particularly in small schools, Peter. A bad leader can kill a school.
Yeah.
A good leader, you just cited some examples with me offline. A good leader can turn a school around and make it flourish pretty quickly, particularly if they have a strong board working with them. I think a lot of boards are nervous about what's happening in our country, and rightly so. There's a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
International kids are a big issue right now. DEIB, we know all about that. And schools are trying to. I think school leaders are in a tougher position now than they ever have been, even harder than during COVID.
Oh, John, I think this is like literally, like if you scan the horizon of professions, like this, being a head of school is one of the toughest jobs that
Oh, no question.
I can think of. Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
no question.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, I've, John, like you, I've talked to a lot of heads of school, right? Lots and lots of heads of school. And I often ask them, what was one of the biggest learning curves when you landed in the seat, especially if it's your first role as a head. And they often talk about just like the steep learning curve on the business side. It could be operational, it could be financial, it could be fundraising, it could be like working effectively with the board. I'm curious, since you're working with lots of aspiring leaders, like what are some of the gaps that you're seeing today that if you were sitting down with an aspiring leader saying, hey, like as you're thinking about your career trajectory, like start closing some of these gaps?
Yeah. Wow. And there are gaps. And, our mutual friend, Pat Bassett, always used to say, every search committee is looking for God on a good day. Right. And, it's just, and I laughed when I first heard it. I said, you're right.
Yeah.
When I left Old Trail, one of my last board meetings, my board asked me to provide a list of skills that are necessary to do the headship. And I think I stopped after 37. And, and they just said, how are we going to do this? I said, you're not. Half of these I learned on the job. I've been here 17 years. I did not come in knowing all this stuff.
Right.
I think curiosity is a real important trait in a new head. For a first-time head, you got to realize you're not going to know everything.
Yeah.
I did a governance presentation with a big, strong school, great head of school, doing sensational work. And when we were talking before we met with his board, he said, you know, what's really interesting? I said, what's that? And he said, when I reflect back on my career as a teacher, a coach, a dorm parent, whatever, he said, nothing that I did before becoming a head prepared me to be a head of school.
It doesn't
Nothing.
surprise me, John. Yeah.
Zero.
Surprise me. Yeah.
And so I asked him to go deeper. And he says, well, all kinds of financial arrangements we've done, bonds, helping the audit committee make difficult decisions financially, budgeting, investments, working with a big, powerful board, many of whom are used to running their own companies. And how do you manage that? The physical plant management, difficult situations with families and personnel. The other thing, Peter, I've been thinking about this ahead of this podcast. I think there's another big piece that's really difficult until you become a head. And that is making decisions that you know are going to negatively impact people.
Yeah.
Now, you try and make a decision that's going to be in the best interest. And, a lot of people are going to be excited about it or whatever. But there are always going to be some people that are either negative about the decision or it impacts them negatively. And no position in the school prepares you for that.
Yeah.
Nothing.
John, do you think that it just feels to me like the tenure of a head is shorter than it was years ago.
It is. Yeah. When I became a head in 1996, the tenure was about 8.5 years. And now I'm told it's about 5.2.
Okay. So break that down for me. You just said like you wrote down you stopped at 37 things that the board should be thinking about. Is this the complexity of the job too much? Is it that, we're not training people in the right? I'm just curious, like, why do you think that tenure has shrunk by what, like 40%?
I think it's expectations. What I'd love to know, and I'll ask NAIS, I want to know, I think we're training people to be heads. I think leadership training is substantially improved in the last 4 years.
100%.
And there's great people. People always ask me, are you finding a good bevy of candidates for these jobs? Yes. There are a lot of wonderful people in our schools and frankly in public schools and other types of educators that are well prepared for headship. I think the expectations sometimes, Peter, are much too high. I think board members, for example, I told you I did this seminar yesterday with enrollment managers. I think boards have unrealized and unfair expectations of the head when enrollment declines. And they want to throttle somebody. Why are we down 20 kids? This is the enrollment manager's fault or it's the head of school's fault. Oh, it doesn't have anything to do with 6% tuition increases for the last 7 years.
Fewer kids being born.
New competitors, less expensive competitors, public schools and parochial schools or faith-based schools getting stronger and better at much less price. Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into it. But I think that the candidate pool right now is as strong as ever. And I think the preparation is better. I just think sometimes we have unreal expectations of people's leadership abilities.
Yeah, and so to me that suggests like as a head or a prospective head, understanding how to manage up is really important.
Oh, it's very important. It's very important. And you've got to when we talk with heads, we got to talk about managing the board. Tom Overston's book on strategy talks a lot about the head. Head really has to push the board. I think a lot of heads are afraid of their boards. A lot of heads are fearful of being fired if they make strong suggestions. That's what they should do. And I think when you build that great relationship with the board chair, that fear is going to go away. And if you have a board chair that's a really strong partner, the board chair is going to educate the rest of the board. We want our head to tell us what we need to be doing. This is not our universe. We find that a lot.
So then some really kind of sharpening your fluency around governance is an important.
I think that's very important. As is, let's get into financial acumen,
Yeah.
particularly for the smaller, struggling schools. And sometimes there's big, struggling schools,
Yeah.
but the financial management is really important. You have to have a relationship with your CFO that's powerful. You have to have a CFO that knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
A lot of them have been there for a long time and things have changed in their financial world. But some schools are managing really complex and complicated financial systems. And yeah, I think it's very important for heads to develop enough financial acumen so that they can help share the burden of making some difficult decisions with the CFO and the board treasurer and then the board.
I completely agree. I mean, this is one of the financial acumen and data informed decision making. That's like one of the competencies that I teach inside of my community.
Mhm.
And you don't have to be like a CPO.
No.
You don't have to be a CFO type, but you have to have some basic understanding of it so that you can ask the right questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to know the financial measurements, you got to know the budget, you got to know, the documents that are shared with the board, sit down with your CFO, go over the balance sheet, you know,
Yeah.
um, the budgeting process is important, but other schools are managing, like I said, some complex financial situation. You got to understand it, here's another thing, Peter. I find a lot of heads are afraid, and a lot of boards, a lot of heads, a lot of CFOs are afraid of their auditor. I learned early on, auditor's one of my good friends. Not personally, but in terms of their knowledge base and how they could help me make some big financial decisions. Auditors can be a great resource.
Can you give an example of that? Like,
Sure.
yeah.
So, you have a list of financial needs for the school.
Yep.
You're given a gift, and the donor is torn between making it go for endowment or making it go for cash reserves or a specific project.
Yep.
Call up your auditor and say, look, as you know, the financial realities of our school, what's in our best interest? Do we divide the gift up and put it in different buckets, or do we put it all into endowment to build that because it's a strategic priority? Help me help my donor. I did that twice. It was huge.
And so what I'm hearing here, John, is that being fluent in some of these business competencies, as well as really understanding how to manage up board governance, all that sort of stuff, does that come up more often now when you're doing leadership searches? Like, are boards saying, "Hey, we need to make sure that this incoming leader has some solid business skills," or is that just not a thing right now?
The business acumen comes up on every list. So one of the things we do as consultants is doing that analysis, we spend a lot of time with the board. I just did this 2 weeks ago. I spent 2.5 hours with the board, and I said, we are not leaving here until we have a really strong list of the priorities that you're looking for in your next head, and you need to convince me why they're a priority, because I need to go find the people that have this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in business hack, okay, what do you mean by that? I make them drill down. Business acumen is on everyone's list, but here's what else is on their list. You got to be warm. You got to be empathetic. You got to be a great listener. You got to be wonderful with kids. You got to know all the kids' names. Okay, you got a 1,300 student school. That's interesting. You've got to be able to manage faculty. You got to be great with parents. You got to be a dynamic communicator. You got to be an incredible public speaker. I mean, the list goes on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's, the list of what schools are looking for is fairly similar. I actually had a trustee ask me that, hey, John, when you get these lists of the priorities, is every school's list look the same? I said, no, not entirely. I had a school that had a really difficult previous situation with their head. Personal integrity was first on their list.
Mm.
So a lot depends on the situations that they've been dealing with. The other thing we try and do is steer them away from the previous head. Don't just find somebody with skills that they didn't have. What does the school need?
Yeah.
In the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, you see that a lot, not just in like head searches, but in any kind of like senior leadership position. They kind of swing to the direction of, oh, well, they didn't have those competencies. Like we need to definitely double down on those now. Yeah.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
20 years ago, Peter, the number one thing they all look for was academic. They have to have been a great teacher, and we still want them to teach. And you don't hear that so much anymore. Although the faculty want someone who's had teaching experience, who's walked in their shoes.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. Like how, given the complexities of running in independent schools, that they are extraordinarily dynamic and,
Mhm.
different financial levers, lots of constituent groups, like all the things, right? That make it very, very hard. How can boards or incoming heads kind of help educate faculty to that?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, it takes me back. Old Trail had a tradition. I don't know if it's a tradition, but it happened every year. When we did our first opening meeting with the faculty, the board chair always came and spoke and thanked the faculty for the previous year.
Yeah.
And then they would tell the faculty what the board was expecting of me for the coming year. And it helped a lot. The faculty, it just didn't used to happen. I had a board chair that really wanted to do it. And great, come on in, talk to the faculty, thank them profusely. And then, sure, you can share my goals that I've created with the board um, and what they're expecting. Helped a lot because it was coming from someone else,
Yeah.
not just me.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to talk to schools about is if as a school, and before we started on the recording, we were talking about strategy and schools that are doing interesting things with strategy. Like one of the things that's really powerful and enabling about strategy is that if you have a clear strategy, it's socialized and you are very clear about your vision and about where you're going to go,
Mhm.
it helps your faculty, your staff, all of your constituents have a better understanding of where decisions are rooted.
Absolutely.
And I just think that's an opportunity is that if you can be very clear about your vision as a school, like you spent a lot of time and energy and resources into a strategic plan, like making sure that you're constantly pointing back to that as your North Star, I think gives you the ability to make decisions that if you don't are really hard. Like if you don't do that, it gets really complicated.
No question, but here's the problem. Less
Yeah.
than 1% of independent schools have a real strategic plan.
Well, that's another conversation for another day. But
It is.
I think at a
You're right.
minimum,
Yeah.
like strategic plans often create a vision. Now, it
They
may be
should. They should.
they should, right? And it may be similar to a vision down the street. And you can,
Mhm.
I know Tom wrote a lot about in his book, Leading Through Strategy, he talks
Mhm.
about, differentiation and strategy is like an internal thing. Like I get like that's a whole nother podcast for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that if you can craft that vision, it does open up a lot of opportunity for the school to do interesting things. Hey,
No question.
a few more questions
Yeah.
as
Fire
we
away.
before we go. Um, do you think, and I think I know the answer, so I'm curious what you think the solution might be. Do you think aspiring heads or aspiring leaders are getting enough exposure to all the things that we just talked about? Business operations, enrollment, fundraising, board work. Like,
Absolutely not.
yeah. How do we solve that? How do we solve that?
I think a lot of the existing programs they do a great job on helping candidates build a network of people in their age group, their experience group, and that's important. Heads got to have friends.
Yeah.
Um, but I think we gloss over too many topics, and I think we need. I think the universe of independent schools needs a strong program or strong programs based on the business aspects of running a school. And that includes strategy, that includes vision, but it includes business acumen, and it includes, you know, really running of the school. Because these are corporations. Some of our independent schools are 30, $40 million corporations. They're complex, they're complicated. People have got to know what to do.
Yeah.
I don't think, and I learned a lot from three board chairs. I used to joke with everybody. I feel like I have an MBA because I had three board chairs that were incredible. They own their own businesses and taught me a lot. A lot of heads don't have that, and they need it. So I'm not an expert, but I know enough. I know how to ask important questions,
Yeah.
and I know how to seek out the answers we need. And that's half the battle right there.
Yeah. And John, that's why I founded my company. That's why I built my member community, is to provide that kind of support, because it's been very clear as I've been interviewing heads that, like, to me, this is the opportunity. Like, if we can start to train aspiring leaders and close that gap and give them the fluency that they need, that it will give schools, a better opportunity to execute a more dynamic financial future.
No question.
Versus like just pulling the same playbook off the shelf year after year and hoping it's going to work.
Right. Yeah.
As you're seeing your heads, you're placing heads and you've got heads in roles. Like, what are some of the patterns that you see from these folks who are really successful in that heads role, from the business side, right? Like, we just talked about the business side of running a school.
Well, the relationship with the board is critical. If the relationship with the board is positive, good things happen. Everyone's blood pressure goes down. The heads aren't afraid to take control. They're not afraid to ask hard questions. If the relationship is tough, nothing good really happens. And I've had experience working with both. So I think that relationship, we really focus on building that relationship with not just your board chair, but with your board. Really important. And so you could be a financial expert, but if you don't have the trust of your board, and if you don't have a good working relationship, it's not going to matter. So I really think that's just about everything. And I used my board chair. I had a board chair looked at me one day, says, "You're looking a little stressed." And I said, "Well, we are in a campaign, and I had this happen, I had that happen." He says, "How are you feeling?" I said, "I'm a little overwhelmed." He gave me an executive coach.
Yeah.
Boom.
That's great.
And that's what you need. That's support. We emphasize a lot in transition and the role. When I do governance training, support is a key word there. Support your head. They're not going to come in knowing everything. So support them and help them in areas where they're not real strong.
Yeah. I love that idea of an executive coach. I've been lucky enough in my past to have one, and it just makes it can make all the difference in the world. Hey, last question, John. So what I always love to do is end with like some version of this question. So for those folks who are listening right now, and I imagine we've got some heads, some board chairs, a lot of aspiring leaders, what advice would you give them for developing that business side of their leadership toolkit?
Well, one of the things I tell, so we have, because my name's on the letterhead and I take the phone calls for the firm, I'm called frequently by folks who have not been ahead yet, but they want to prepare. And if they get me early in their lifespan and they're talking about going back to school, I always encourage them to go get an MBA.
Yeah.
Not in a degree in educational administration or educational leadership, because they probably have that already. An MBA helps enormously. I don't have one. I kind of wish I did, but I also think my big advice is really thinking about the culture of a school. Don't just look at geography or where your spouse or partner want to go to be closer to family. You got to look at the culture of the school. And if you don't fit the culture, it's not going to work very well, or you certainly probably won't enjoy your job the way you could. And, we know Peter Drucker said years ago, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you're in a school that doesn't meet your personal culture, it's going to be difficult. So I always tell candidates, let's look, okay, if geography is important, let's look at the schools within that geography and who has some culture that resonates with you and will work. And that's where you ought to put your focus. Don't just go take a headship to get a headship.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing we talk to families about, right? Like,
Sure.
School, it's all about school fit. Does our program fit for your child, and vice versa? So,
Yeah.
John Farber, RG 175, how can people get a hold of you?
Farber at rg175.com.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much for sharing. I have a feeling
Peter.
this is going to be a pretty popular podcast. There's a lot of great info in here. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for your leadership in doing this.
Hi there, my friend. I want to thank RG175 for sponsoring this episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. Great schools thrive under great leadership. At RG175, we understand that finding the right match between a school and its next leader is a defining moment for both heads and trustees. With extensive experience in independent school leadership and a highly personalized approach, we guide boards through thoughtful search processes and support school leaders through key career transitions. Whether you're looking for your next leadership opportunity or seeking the ideal fit for your school, RG175 is here to help. Visit rg175.com. Again, that's rg175.com to learn more, because behind every successful school is a great leader.